My parents said we don't approve of your in-laws, then threatened me with a lawsuit over my own wedding. I never imagined my own parents would go as far as threatening to sue me over my wedding day. But there I was, frozen in my kitchen, staring at a formal letter they'd sent, all because they didn't approve of my fiance's family. The same parents who once said all they wanted was my happiness were now trying to stop the celebration I'd spent years dreaming of. The trouble started about 3 months before the wedding. Neil and I were newly engaged, still basking in that post-proposal glow when my mother called me out of the blue. "Victoria," she began, with that too-sweet tone she used whenever she was about to say something hurtful, "your father and I have been talking. We're concerned about some of the guests on the invitation list, particularly Neil's parents." My stomach dropped. I should have known the conversation would eventually come. Dad and Mom had never been too thrilled about Neil's family background. His parents were warm, loud, and wore their hearts on their sleeves, qualities my parents often dismissed as unrefined. But I'd never expected they'd actually demand to keep them away from my wedding. "Mom," I said gently, bracing myself for the worst, "they're my future in-laws. Of course they're invited." She sighed dramatically, then continued, "But do you really think it's appropriate for them to mingle with our side? Some of your uncles, your grandmother, they might be uncomfortable. We're just trying to protect you from any embarrassment." Her words felt like a slap. Embarrassment? Neil's parents are good people. They're not criminals. They're not going to cause trouble. How could you even say that? Mom huffed, clearly annoyed that I wasn't going along with her plan. "You have to think of the bigger picture, dear. Your father and I have a certain vision for this wedding, and we're not sure Neil's side fits." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Well, maybe we don't share that vision. If you can't handle them being there, maybe you shouldn't come." It was an impulsive statement, one that made my heart pound as soon as it left my mouth. But I couldn't take it back, and honestly, I didn't want to. Mom's voice went cold. "Think very carefully about what you're saying, Victoria. You don't want to regret those words." And just like that, she hung up. I spent the rest of the day replaying that conversation. By the time Neil came home, I was sitting at the dining table with my head in my hands. He took one look at me and his brow furrowed with concern. "What happened?" he asked, setting his keys down gently. I forced a small smile and explained it all. How my parents didn't want his folks at the wedding, how they found them unrefined, how they thought it would be too embarrassing to host them. Neil's jaw clenched, his cheeks flushing with anger. "This is about my dad's accent, isn't it?" he said quietly, bitterness seeping into his tone. "Or my mom's big personality." I sighed, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "I'm so sorry, they've never understood your family. But I want your parents there. I need them there. It's our day, not my parents." His expression softened. "We won't bend to their demands. We'll figure this out. Don't let them bully you." I nodded, trying to muster the courage I knew I'd need in the weeks to come. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Dad, we need to talk about financial arrangements for the wedding. Call me ASAP." I knew exactly what this meant. My parents had offered months ago to cover part of the wedding expenses, a gesture I initially appreciated. But now I saw the strings attached. My stomach twisted as I dialed. "Hello, Victoria," Dad answered, sounding brisk. "Your mother told me about your little disagreement. We think the best way forward is if we break off from the main reception. That way, Neil's family can have their own gathering, and we'll host a separate event." I closed my eyes. "Dad, that's insane. We're having one wedding, not two separate ones. This is supposed to be a unifying day." He let out a low chuckle. "You want our help with the budget, don't you? Then you'll have to compromise. If we're paying, we have a say in how it's done." My grip on the phone tightened. "If that's how you see it, then I'll pay you back every cent," I snapped. "We're not splitting the wedding." He was silent for a beat. "Don't be rash, Victoria. You can't possibly cover everything on your own. Watch me," I muttered, then hung up. That night, Neil and I sat down to crunch the numbers. It would be tight without my parents' contribution, but we had some savings and we could scale back a bit. As we rearranged our plans, I felt a strange combination of relief and sadness. Relief that we'd no longer be beholden to my parents' manipulations. Sadness because I realized it might ruin whatever fragile peace remained with them. But I refused to let them hold my wedding hostage. The next day, I sent my parents a concise email. "Thank you for your previous offer to assist with wedding expenses, but I will be handling the costs myself going forward. Neil's parents are absolutely welcome. If you choose not to attend, I'll respect your decision. Victoria." They didn't respond right away. Days passed in silence. Blissful silence, to be honest. Then my sister, Jade, sent me a message. "Mom and Dad are furious. They say you're shutting them out. You know how Dad told me they want to have a serious discussion about your attitude." "Thanks for the heads up," I replied. Jade was younger, still living at home, caught between loyalty to them and her desire to support me. I hated dragging her into this mess, but that's how my parents operated. They recruited allies within the family, pitted us against each other. I wasn't going to give in this time. A week later, Mom tried a new tactic. She showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door, startled to see her holding a small gift bag and wearing a bright, forced smile. "Victoria, I've come to talk things out," she said, stepping inside before I could respond. "We can't let a little misunderstanding derail the whole wedding." My hands shook with frustration. "This isn't a little misunderstanding. You literally tried to ban Neil's parents from attending." She gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "We were only trying to maintain standards. You know, your father and I have always had certain aspirations for you." I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice level. "I'm not aspiring to be anything except happy with Neil and our combined families. And if you can't accept that, maybe you shouldn't be part of the wedding." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You don't mean that. We've supported you your whole life. You owe us some respect." I crossed my arms. "Respect goes both ways, Mom," she sniffed, placing the gift bag on my coffee table. "This is an early wedding present, a family heirloom. I'd hate for you to do something you'd regret later, like cutting us out completely." Her words felt like a threat. I refused to take the bait. Mom, you need to leave. I'm not budging on this. Her face hardened and she strode out without another word. As soon as the door clicked shut, I slumped to the floor, my breath shaking. This was my wedding, yet I felt more like a chess piece in their power game. I thought maybe Mom's theatrical visit would be the peak of the drama. But a few days later, Neil showed me an email he'd just received from my father, of all people. It contained a pointed message. Since your family is unsuited for our social circle, we have no choice but to protect Victoria's interests. If we can't resolve this amicably, we'll pursue legal avenues to ensure she isn't financially entangled with you. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Was my father implying that they would sue Neil for marrying me? Or sue me in some twisted way to keep my assets separate? It sounded bizarre and impossible, yet there it was in black and white. This is insane, Neil muttered, jaw tense. Your father's basically threatening to drag us into court just because he doesn't like my parents. Tears burned my eyes. I won't let them ruin our relationship. I don't care what they do. But inside, I was shaken to the core. Not long after that, I got a certified letter in the mail. My parents' names were in the sender's address. Dread settled in my stomach as I signed for it and tore it open. Inside was a formal statement from a lawyer, a notice of potential litigation regarding financial disputes surrounding my upcoming marriage. They wanted to dispute the distribution of any wedding expenses and threatened to claim emotional distress if I continued to alienate them. I let out a bitter laugh. Emotional distress? Because I was trying to include in-laws in my own wedding? It was absurd. But that's how low my parents were willing to go. I texted Jade, attaching a photo of the letter. They've officially lost it. Do they really think they have any legal standing? She called me back a few minutes later, whispering so Mom and Dad wouldn't overhear. They're just trying to scare you, she assured me. I heard Dad on the phone with a lawyer. Apparently, they're well aware the case wouldn't hold up. They're just hoping you'll cave. That night, I sat on the couch with Neil, going through every line of the letter and drafting our response. We decided to consult our own lawyer, a friend of Neil's family who offered to help for free. He confirmed it was ridiculous. They have no real case, he said. It's purely a scare tactic. I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to let them bully me. I fired back a polite but firm letter, stating I would not be pressured into excluding anyone from my wedding, and if they continued with baseless legal threats, I'd be the one considering a restraining order. Silence followed for nearly 2 weeks. No calls, no messages, no surprise visits. Part of me was relieved. I finally had space to plan the wedding the way Neil and I wanted. We chose a beautiful garden venue, found a wonderful caterer, and started designing our invitations with both families' names on them, side by side. Neil's parents were thrilled, offering help wherever they could. Taste testings, suit fittings, and plenty of emotional support. They never once overstepped or demanded anything. Meanwhile, my own parents stayed silent. If they wanted to push me away, I was done trying to pull them close. Then, exactly 1 month before the wedding, Dad reached out. He left a voicemail, his tone stern yet cautious. Victoria, this has gone on long enough. I want to talk. Meet me at your grandmother's house tomorrow at noon. I debated ignoring him, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe, just maybe, he was ready to apologize. The next day, I showed up at Grandma's house. I found Dad in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. Mom sat perched on the couch, arms folded. Grandma stood in the corner, looking worried. As soon as I walked in, Dad spoke. We want to work this out, but we need assurances that you won't be embarrassed by Neil's family. This is your wedding, but it reflects on us too. We can't allow them to overshadow the event. I felt my anger spike, but I kept my voice calm. Overshadow? They're just going to celebrate with us. They're not performing a circus act. Mom reached for Grandma's hand, as if to garner sympathy. We're thinking of your grandmother. She's frail. She can't handle the chaos. Grandma's cheeks reddened. I'm fine. Don't drag me into this, she muttered, stepping away. I let out a slow breath. Mom, Dad, I love Grandma too, but the wedding is set. Neil's parents are coming, and we're not dividing anything. I'm done discussing it. Dad's eyes flashed. Then we have nothing else to say. Mom rose, collecting her purse. Good luck with your unrefined in-laws. Don't come crying to us if it all falls apart. They stormed out. Grandma offered me a hug and whispered, You do what makes you happy, sweetheart. Don't let them steal that from you. I left the house feeling oddly at peace, as if I'd finally closed a door that had been hanging open too long. I was done trying to please people who'd do anything to get their way, even threaten me with lawsuits. Neil and I finalized our wedding plans without a backward glance. The big day arrived with a surprising mixture of nerves and excitement. When I walked down the aisle, I scanned the crowd. Neil's family beamed up at me, cheering softly. My sister Jade sat with Grandma, waving, but my parents' seats were noticeably empty. A pang of sadness hit me. Despite everything, a part of me had hoped they'd show up, but I wouldn't let their absence destroy my joy. I locked eyes with Neil and felt my heart swell. This was about us, the love we shared and the future we were building. The reception was magical. We danced, we laughed, and every person in that garden felt like genuine family, especially Neil's parents, who were as kind and generous as ever. Jade gave a tearful toast, apologizing for our parents and wishing us lifelong happiness. Grandma joined us on the dance floor in her wheelchair, clapping along, while Jade and I twirled to an old favorite tune. We cut the cake, and for a moment, I forgot all the drama that led us there. Later that night, after the music ended and the guests trickled home, Neil and I sat on a swing beneath an arch of fairy lights. He laced his fingers through mine. I'm sorry your parents weren't here, he said gently. I know that hurts. I sighed, resting my head on his shoulder. It does, but I also feel free. I didn't let them ruin this. I stood my ground. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. And now we can move forward. Together. Days turned into weeks. My parents' threats of lawsuits faded into memory. Their letters stopped. Their calls ceased. Apparently, once they realized they had no leverage, they decided to withdraw in silent resentment. Jade said they were sulking but wouldn't admit wrongdoing. Part of me mourned the relationship I thought I had with them, but mostly I felt relieved that the tension was finally gone. A month later, Neil and I received a small package in the mail from my grandmother. Inside was a handwritten note. "I'm proud of you, Victoria. You and Neil deserve every happiness. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Wrapped in tissue paper was the same heirloom my mother had once tried to wield as emotional blackmail, a delicate necklace with a small pendant. I wore it that night, tears in my eyes, grateful that some part of my family still knew what real love was. Life moved on. Neil and I settled into married life, learning each other's quirks, planning future travels, hosting his parents for Sunday brunches. The wedding day drama slipped further behind us, replaced by the warmth of our life together. My parents remained distant shadows, refusing to reach out. Sometimes I caught myself wishing it were different. But every time that pang of regret surfaced, I reminded myself of how far they went, trying to cut out my in-laws using financial blackmail, threatening legal action. If that was their idea of love, then it wasn't the kind I needed. Eventually, Jade called to say Mom and Dad were ready to talk if I would apologize for my disrespect. I politely declined. I wasn't going to bow to an ultimatum. I'd set my boundaries, and I would keep them. If they wanted a relationship, they knew how to reach me. No strings attached, no demands. Until then, I had my husband, my sister, my grandmother, and an entire new family that welcomed me without judgment. I finally understood the power in choosing my own peace over someone else's toxicity. My parents might never accept Neil's family or the choices I made, but I no longer needed their approval. I had the love of a good man, the warmth of people who respected me for who I was, and the freedom to live without being controlled or threatened. And in the end, I realized something. Family isn't about blood or rigid standards. It's about genuine care, understanding, and support. I had that in Neil and his parents, in my sister and grandmother, and that was more than enough. My wedding day, even with all the attempted sabotage, had been ours. A celebration of real love. And no lawsuit, no disapproving parent, and no empty threats could ever take that away.